November will mark 20 years since Alistair Wilson was murdered on the doorstep of his home in Nairn. For 2 decades, the killer has never been caught. Alistair's family have spoken with the Press and Journal and raised serious concerns about Police Scotland and Chief Constable Jo Farrell. Andrew Wilson was 4 when his father was murdered, and this week he said this: "We question why our family is still being kept in the dark while Jo Farrell is basking in the media spotlight as she talks of building bridges and providing confidence to our family." Andrew continued, "We don't know whether Jo Farrell has been confused or perhaps even caught in a lie, but she has certainly failed to reassure us that she has a grip on the worsening situation." Alistair Wilson's family described the conduct of the Chief Constable as insulting and callous. So does the First Minister agree with the family of Alistair Wilson?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, this is obviously an incredibly sensitive case, and the first thing I want to say is to express my sympathy to the Wilson family at the tragedy they suffered almost 20 years ago, and to share their frustration that this case has not been resolved. Mr Ross will know that there has been extensive intervention and investigation to try to identify who was responsible for the murder of Alistair Wilson, and I welcome very much the fact that the Lord Advocate, who, as Mr Ross again will understand, is the independent head of the Prosecution Service, has instructed that a fresh investigation be undertaken of this case. The point that Mr Ross puts to me about the actions of the Chief Constable, again, Mr Ross will appreciate that the police operate with absolute operational independence from the government. It would be inappropriate of me to indicate any opinion on the stance taken by the Chief Constable. It is a matter for the Chief Constable to address, and certainly the First Minister should not be indicating to the Chief Constable what actions she should take in relation to a live investigation.
Douglas Ross.
My question, because I know the situation very well, my question was not asking about the live police investigation. It's asking about the comments of a family this week, a family still grieving the loss in horrific circumstances. And the response from Police Scotland, following the decision by the Lord Advocate, is one that clearly falls below any standard we should expect, particularly from the Chief Constable of Police Scotland. So I hope the First Minister will at least reflect on that language, insulting and callous. The Chief Constable is being described by a grieving family as callous, and I hope the First Minister will reflect on that and seek to address what could happen, because this case has been unsolved for 2 decades, but it's also spanned several Chief Constables and several government ministers. The Wilson family have raised concerns about the current Chief Constable's handling of the case, but the Scottish Government are not powerless in this situation. Indeed, the First Minister has previously spoken about ongoing police investigations in his own constituency. So can I ask the First Minister if he or his Justice Secretary have spoken with the family of Alistair Wilson about their significant concerns, and if so, what has been done to address these?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I don't want in any way to create any sense that I am not sympathetic and empathetic to the situation in which the Wilson family find themselves. Alistair Wilson was murdered on his own doorstep. His killers have not been brought to justice, and that deeply concerns me. I think it is important that I place on the record that Police Scotland have had formidable success in resolving cases of murder, some of them long in the past, because of the improvement in investigative procedures and practices, and that has resulted in a number of people being brought to justice who had remained with freedom, having been committed some of the worst crimes imaginable in our society. So Police Scotland does focus on resolving these matters, and that's why I said in my first answer that I welcome the instruction from the Lord Advocate for a further investigation of this case. Now, neither I nor the Justice Secretary have spoken to the Wilson family about their concerns. And I think it's, Mr Ross raises the fact that I've expressed points in relation to previous cases in my own constituency. I did that respectfully when I was on the backbenches. I was not First Minister. It's a very different matter when the First Minister starts commenting on live cases, and I think I need to avoid doing that for the sake of protecting the constitutional separation of responsibility for operational matters with Police Scotland. But I would say to Mr Ross, I have every sympathy with the Wilson family, and I hope that the actions that the Lord Advocate is taking, and which have been pursued now by Police Scotland, will provide a resolution to the deep concerns that the family has.
Douglas Ross.
In December last year, the Wilson family complained to the Police Investigation and Review Commissioner about the handling of the police investigation. But looking at this more widely across the country, the current system of police complaints was set up by the SNP government when they centralised Scotland's police forces back in 2013. And as the experience of the Wilson family shows, it's clear that the current system is not fit for purpose. The police bill that's currently before Parliament aims to address these failings, but there are still areas where it falls short. Just yesterday, His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary in Scotland called for an amendment to the bill which would allow officers who face criminal charges to face criminal charges if they abuse their position. I agree with that, and I can confirm that Scottish Conservatives have lodged an amendment which would add this provision to the police bill when it goes to committee next week. So will the First Minister back the inspector's calls and support our Scottish Conservative amendment to ensure that any police officers who abuse their position are held to account?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I have a great deal of sympathy with the point that Mr Ross has raised with me today, and Ministers will look carefully at the amendment that comes forward for Stage 2, because part of the purpose of the Police Ethics, Conduct and Scrutiny Bill, which I actually began some scrutiny of when I was on the backbenches in the Criminal Justice Committee, is coming to Stage 2 proceedings in Parliament. It's been supported at Stage 1, Stage 2 at Committee. It's been supported by Parliament at Stage 1. The issues that His Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary raised in the proposal have not been the subject of consultation as part of the preparation of the bill. So that's an issue which we have to be mindful of in considering the amendments that come forward, because obviously Parliament does prefer to ensure that issues are the subject of consultation. But having said that, I am sympathetic to the point that Douglas Ross raises, because I do want to ensure that the Police Investigation and Review Commissioner is actually able to undertake the type of functions that I think both Mr Ross and I would want them to undertake. And that has to be effective, it has to be transparent, it has to be challenging. And as the bill takes its passage through Parliament, I give Mr Ross the assurance that Ministers will look carefully and consider carefully any proposals that will work to strengthen that test that I've put to Parliament today.
Douglas Ross.
Because our amendment does strengthen the bill and it does fill a void that even HMIC have recognised. But the truth is, Presiding Officer, that while Police Scotland may have let down the Wilson family, this government have been letting down police officers and the communities they serve right across Scotland. Officer numbers are now at their lowest level here in Scotland for 17 years. The SNP used to promise that they would put 1,000 additional officers on Scotland's streets, but numbers are now down by 1,200 compared to when the SNP created Police Scotland a decade ago. The number of major investigation team DIs, which investigate the most serious crimes, including murders like those of Alistair Wilson, are down by a third. And Police Scotland are so stretched they are no longer able to investigate every crime. Quite frankly, the SNP have left our police to fight crime with one hand tied behind their back, and the results are clear. Violent crime at its highest level in a decade, and our prisons so overwhelmed that SNP ministers have been forced to release prisoners en masse. So can I ask the First Minister, does he agree with his Deputy Kate Forbes, who said that under the SNP, policing has been stretched to breaking point.
First Minister.
President Officer, I think I have to put on the record the fact that levels of crime in Scotland are currently at 40-year lows. 40-year lows. And that's a tribute to the work of police officers focusing on the tackling of crime in localities. Now, I accept that police numbers have fallen. There's, at the last census at the end of June, they were sitting at 16,207, and that is lower than the government expected, given that we had given the police record funding of £1.55 billion. Now, I expect those numbers to increase, and in the next census for those numbers to increase. So there should be some reassurance to Mr Ross that police numbers are strengthening as a consequence of the significant levels of recruitment that the Chief Constable and Police Scotland are undertaking at the present moment. Now, there is an inherent contradiction in Mr Ross's question to me, that his accusation is that crime is not being pursued, but the prisons are full. Well, if the prisons are full, that suggests to me that crime is being pursued and more individuals are being convicted and imprisoned.
Let's hear the First Minister.
So, I would respectfully say to Mr Ross that there are challenges in relation to the work of Police Scotland. Police Scotland will make the necessary steps to investigate crimes where there is evidence to do so, and that people will be convicted, will be prosecuted where there is a case to do so. That is what we would expect, and that's what we would expect in a system where we have a 40-year low of crime as a consequence of this government's stewardship of police resources in Scotland.